The story begins with the protagonist of the story, the Baskerville family's hound, Vikir van Baskerville's head on a guillotine. He was a loyal hound for the family, but he had been sentenced to the guillotine for false charges of associating with the demon clan. As he faced his death, he made a vow that if he were to live again, he would not live as a hound again. Afterwards, Vikir woke up in a cradle, disoriented and confused. He thought he might be in hell, as his surroundings were loud and his body felt heavy. It looked like Vikir was currently at a nursery, as there were many children there, all of them crying. Meanwhile, the Baskerville family patriarch, Hugo Le Baskerville, was inspecting the children's cradle. He roamed around the room and noticed children crying, and he dismissed them as insignificant, and even referred to them as trash. However, when he approached Vikir, he noticed that the child was quieter than the others. Hugo ordered for Vikir to be moved to the Cradle of Swords, and his attendant obeyed without question. As Vikir lay in the cradle, he looked up at Hugo with pure hatred in his eyes. He knew that Hugo was the main culprit behind his false charges and subsequent execution. Vikir realized that he had been regressed to when he was a baby, and that he had lived his past life as a hound for the Baskerville family. Vikir had been born into an illegitimate family and had received training in a poor environment. He had been raised to be a loyal hound, willing to do any dirty work that was required of him in order to make the Baskerville family the best of the 7 families. Vikir had stayed loyal to the family and to Hugo because he had wanted to be acknowledged. But his loyalty had ultimately been repaid with a death sentence. The reason behind his execution was simple. He knew too much. Vikir swore that he would never live that life again and that he would take his revenge. However, with his newborn body, he knew that he couldn't do anything. Being moved to the Cradle of Swords was a good opportunity for Vikir to become stronger. Children born into the Baskerville family had to go through one trial called the Cradle of Swords. They were thrown into a maze of swords, and after going through that, they had to get to the Styx River to be examined for their talent. The Styx River was a legendary river that turned the bodies of children into iron. However, there was a limit to how many children it could affect, so being able to reach it faster was crucial. The only way to reach the Styx River first was to head straight out of the helix-shaped wall of blades, which was no easy feat. As Vikir crawled through the Cradle of Swords maze, he couldn't help but think about his past life. He had been ousted by his siblings and couldn't receive the effect he so desperately needed. But this time, things would be different. He was determined to monopolize the Styx River's blessing for as long as he could. As he made his way through the maze, he suddenly fell into the Styx River. The water seeped deep into his body and bones through his cuts, causing him intense pain. But he knew that he had to endure it for as long as he could. He couldn't let this opportunity slip away from him. Outside the maze, Vikir's attendants were shouting for him to come out. They were worried that he would die if he stayed underwater any longer. But Vikir was determined to hold on for as long as possible. Meanwhile, Hugo watched with expectation in his eyes. He asked the Baskerville family head butler John Barrymore how much time had passed since Vikir had gotten in the river. Barrymore responded that around 7 minutes had passed. Hugo laughed and said that Vikir might die. The attendants looked at him with worry, requesting the patriarch Hugo to save Vikir. Hugo called out to Vikir, telling him that he could come out of the water now. But Vikir was too busy absorbing the Styx River water to pay attention. He thought to himself that he couldn't give up this opportunity so easily. He needed to absorb as much as he could until the very end. But then he started to fall down as water entered his mouth. Despite the danger he was in, Vikir knew that he needed to endure it. He kept repeating to himself to endure, endure, endure. It looked like Vikir was about to drown, but Hugo pulled him out of the water with a smug smile on his face. He commented on how greedy Vikir was, even drinking the water from the Styx River. He then noticed that Vikir already had teeth, which surprised him. Hugo asked the head butler for Vikir's name, and he learned that it was Vikir van Baskerville. Hugo smirked and said that a very greedy son had been born. Vikir, who was still somewhat conscious, thought to himself that he needed to use this time to sharpen his canines in secret. He was determined to rip his master's head off when the time came, and he would do it with his own hands. The Baskerville family would disappear into history too by his own hands. Vikir van Baskerville was born as the bastard son of Hugo Le Baskerville, a renowned nobleman of his time. At the tender age of 8, it was apparent that Vikir possessed an extraordinary intelligence that far surpassed his peers. However, within the Baskerville family, he was considered nothing but ordinary, as he did not possess the direct lineage of the family's prominent bloodline. As Vikir grew older, he began to explore different fields of interest, eventually settling on the treacherous paths of assassination, espionage, and conquest. By the time he had reached the age of 20, he had already embarked on several missions that showcased his impressive skill set. But despite his achievements, Vikir still felt inadequate in comparison to those of direct lineage. At the age of 30, the gate leading to the demonic realm had opened, signaling the beginning of a terrifying invasion by the demon clans. Vikir, now a seasoned warrior, stepped up to defend his realm, engaging in battles that saw him slaughter monsters left and right. For the next 5 years, Vikir endured through the era of destruction, fighting tirelessly to protect his people. And when the long war finally came to an end, it was the humans who emerged victorious. For his unwavering loyalty and bravery, Vikir was rewarded by the kingdom. However, the reward he received was not what he expected. Instead of being praised and celebrated for his efforts, he was met with defamatory accusations and false allegations. These unfounded claims led to Vikir's eventual execution by the guillotine's blade. Vikir sat up on his bed, realizing that he was in a nursery. He looked around and came to the realization that he had successfully absorbed the Styx River. This was a major achievement, and he knew that he now had a better starting point in life than before. Suddenly, he heard the door open and a maid entered the room. The maid seemed surprised and murmured to herself, saying why Madame had asked to place this sort of thing on the bed of the young master Vikir. Vikir was surprised to hear the maid refer to Madame, as he never expected anyone in the Baskerville family to give him, a bastard, a present. The maid left after placing a box in Vikir's bed. As Vikir saw the box opening, he was shocked to see 2 bloody mambas coming out of it. He wondered if Madame had sent them to assassinate him. Vikir knew that there were only a few people in the Baskerville family who would be referred to as Madame, and whoever it was, she was probably trying to reduce competition. As the mambas hissed at Vikir, he realized that they could kill all of the babies in the nursery. However, Vikir caught both the mambas with his bare hands. Filled with hatred, he thought that he would bring the entire Baskerville family down with his own 2 hands. The next day, the people of Baskerville were shocked to find the child sleeping peacefully next to the dead vipers. All the nannies who had been on shift that night were executed after torture. But the reason for the vipers' appearance remained unknown. Only the young hound Vikir knew the truth. 8 years later, Vikir was back in class, listening to his teacher discuss the levels of swordsmanship. The teacher explained that if one cannot yet imbue their sword with mana, they are considered a sword beginner. The next level is the sword expert, where one can infuse the blade with a little bit of mana. When the blade emits mana in liquid-like aura form, it is called sword graduator. Lastly, the level at which the aura is solid and the form can freely be changed is called sword master, which is the highest level of swordsmanship. Upon hearing that Sir Hugo, the strongest of the Baskervilles, was a sword master, all the students present exclaimed in surprise and astonishment. However, Vikir was lost in thought and felt the need to regain the power he had prior to his regression before the coming-of-age ceremony. The teacher noticed Vikir's distracted state and thought highly of him, knowing that he had earned a strong physique by diving in the Styx River for 7 minutes. The teacher believed that Vikir was much more talented than the other students and that the patriarch would be very happy to know about his progress. As Vikir was lost in thought about how many years he needed to kill Hugo, he didn't notice the triplets giving him an evil look. After class was over, they pushed him and started mocking him, calling him a garbage van, and talked about the rumors about him diving in the Styx River and strangling 2 vipers to death when he was just a baby. Vikir recognized the triplets as the ones who had stabbed him in the past when he was running away after the defamation. They were known as Hugo le Baskerville's Trident, and their names were Highborough le Baskerville, Middleborough le Baskerville, and Lowborough le Baskerville, all 9 years old. The triplets continued to taunt Vikir, telling him to stop lying and that they didn't like him. Vikir thought to himself that they were going to be a real pain in the ass in just 10 years and that it might be a good idea to put them in their place now. As Vikir stood before the triplets, one of them brandished a knife and taunted him with a rumor he had heard, that if you stayed in the Styx River for long enough, your body would become like steel, and you would be impervious to injury from blades. The other 2 triplets eagerly echoed their agreement, while the third gave the order for one of the others to hold Vikir still. The triplet caught Vikir from behind and covered his mouth with one hand and said, "I'll eat my hand if he can endure this for 3 minutes." Vikir was not afraid, and even played along with this cruel game for a moment. The triplets attempted to harm him with the knife. 1 minute passed, 3 minutes passed, 10 minutes passed, but Vikir remained unscathed, and the triplets began to realize that the legend they had heard was true. They grew bored with their game and began to release Vikir. As the triplet holding Vikir released him, he noticed blood on his hand and realized that his finger was missing. Vikir then spat out the triplet's finger from his mouth. The triplet was shocked and asked Vikir what he was doing. With an evil smile on his face, Vikir reminded the triplet of his promise to eat his own hand. Meanwhile, the other 2 triplets were trying to calm down the situation and suggested that they go to a priest to put the finger back. But Vikir was not interested in that and instead asked to let them go. The triplet then attacked Vikir with a knife, calling him a bastard and reminding him that they were a year older than him. Vikir did not dodge the attack and allowed the knife to stick into him, but to the triplet's surprise, it could not pierce his skin. Vikir twisted the triplet's hand and reminded them that they had forgotten that they were dealing with a Baskerville, where power and talent overcome age. With an evil look on his face, Vikir suggested that they continue playing until the end. Vikir twisted the triplet's hands mercilessly, causing him to cry out in pain. He declared in a low, menacing voice that they were in Baskerville, where age doesn't matter as long as you have strength and talent. The triplets, terrified, looked at each other in shock. Vikir suddenly punched the triplets, knocking him to the ground, while the other two watched in disbelief. The third triplet attacked Vikir in a fit of anger, but he quickly kicked him in the face, sending him crashing down. The room fell silent as the triplets lay there, battered and broken. Vikir stood over them, looking cold and unfeeling. He then told the triplets that they would get better with treatment, but he also made it clear that he wouldn't let them leave the room and they would have to live with the discomfort of their own bodies. However, he would be generous and allow one of them to leave. The triplets were surprised and relieved to hear this, and asked which one could leave. Vikir picked up a knife and threw it in front of the triplets, telling them that they would have to decide for themselves who would leave the room. He then started to leave, but not before turning back and issuing a taunting remark saying that he can't wait long, so decide quickly. At least one of you should live right. The triplets looked at the knife and then at each other, realizing that survival was their only option. They began to fight, each trying to grab the knife and gain the upper hand. The sounds of their struggle echoed through the room, and Vikir listened with satisfaction from outside. He had successfully caused the Triton of Baskerville to split, pitting brother against brother in a fight for survival. In the Patriarch's office, the head butler, John Barrymore, delivered some unsettling news to the Baskerville clan patriarch, Hugo Le Baskerville. The Moore clan had been causing trouble in the Ruby Mines, claiming it as their territory. However, Patriarch Hugo assured John that they would handle the matter when the Moore clan reached out to them. John then reported on the interim evaluation of the juvenile fortress and informed the Patriarch that Master Vikir had scored the highest on the written exam. The practical exam was scheduled in 5 days, and the Guardian Knights had vacated the premises in preparation. However, John hesitated before informing the Patriarch of a recent incident at the juvenile fortress. John informed the Patriarch that there had been a big fight amongst the young masters at the fortress. Patriarch Hugo was concerned and asked how many of them had died. Butler John informed Hugo that there were no casualties, but Master Highborough's teeth had been completely damaged, Master Midleborough's jaw had been smashed in, and Master Lowborough's left index finger had been amputated. While they had recovered their health since being treated, the psychological damage done to them seemed significant. Patriarch Hugo was taken aback and remarked that they wouldn't have fought amongst themselves since they were so close. John then revealed that there was some friction with another young master, an 8-year-old named Master Vikir, who had wounded the 3 young masters and who also had the highest scores on the written exam. After Patriarch Hugo expressed his concern about the incident at the juvenile fortress, he summoned Vikir to his office. Vikir arrived with a smile on his face and Patriarch Hugo commented on how much he had grown since they last met. Patriarch Hugo then brought up the issue of Vikir disabling the 9-year-old triplets in his senior class. Vikir responded that the brothers had received proper medical treatment since then. However, Patriarch Hugo pointed out that he was not talking about physical disabilities, but the disability of the heart. He explained how the incident had torn the brothers' relationship apart, and asked Vikir if he thought what he did was wrong. To this Vikir responded with a question of his own asking what did he do wrong. Patriarch Hugo pointed out that he had turned his brothers into a total mess. Vikir, with a confident look in his crimson eyes, replied that he was stronger, and how could the stronger person be wrong? Patriarch Hugo then revealed Vikir's brothers had forgiven him, yet he still didn't feel an ounce of guilt. Vikir seemed surprised by this news and asked they forgave me. Vikir suddenly recalled a memory before his regression. The youngest daughter of a family that was ruined by the Baskerville clan came to pay Hugo a visit. She had become a nun after many years, and she forgave Hugo despite his clan being responsible for the ruin of her family. Vikir repeated the same line that Hugo had said to the nun. That forgiveness is an excuse made by the weak who cannot seek revenge due to their lack of strength. As Vikir talked about the importance of strength, Hugo showed his approval by nodding and his eyes glowing with agreement. He then turned to the head butler, Barrymore, and instructed him to allow Vikir to take any snack he wanted from the food storage, enough for him to carry on his own. Vikir expressed his gratitude by requesting chocolates. As Vikir was leaving with head butler, Hugo addressed him as his son, urging him to perform well on the upcoming evaluation and not to lose to the direct descendants. Vikir acknowledged the advice, but his face was filled with hatred. Vikir and head butler made their way to the storage room. The head butler began to inform him about the chocolate. He explained that it was the highest quality chocolate that the Moore clan had obtained with much difficulty, and that it was enjoyed by their gourmands. However, Vikir quickly interrupted him and stated that he didn't want anything that was processed. The head butler was taken aback by this and asked for clarification. Vikir then requested cacao beans, ones that had a rich aroma. The head butler was confused but complied and had the beans brought to Vikir. As Vikir put one of the beans in his mouth, the chef informed him that they were the bloody beans known for their rich aroma and that with just one bean, he could produce 100 liters of chocolate. The head butler watched as Vikir ate the bitter bean, and thought to himself that Vikir must really love chocolate to eat something so bitter on its own. And this was a good method to obtain more chocolate, as after being processed he would have a huge amount of chocolate available. The chef asked Vikir if he wanted them to process the beans and send them to his room, but Vikir declined and said he would take them as is. The head butler was left wondering if Vikir just had peculiar tastes. Vikir had no interest in eating the chocolate, but he had a plan for the cacao beans. Vikir planned to use the beans in the upcoming practical exam in 5 days. Little did they know, a catastrophic event would soon occur, unlike anything that had ever happened before in the Baskerville clan's history. In this world, the Baskerville family is known as the Berserker family due to the intense training and evaluation that their children undergo from a young age. The training begins when the children are able to take their first steps, and they are immediately put through a rigorous test of their stamina. They must run up a steep mountain and are not allowed to lie down or rest on their stomachs except for allocated times. As if this wasn't enough, when it's time for them to sleep, they are required to sleep alongside a monster corpse. This is to help them adjust to tough environments and become resilient in the face of danger. These extreme practices are what make the Baskerville family feared and respected throughout the land. After this period of grueling training, the children reach the age of 8, and the real test begins. The young hounds, as they are called, must undergo a deadly evaluation. This is the defining moment that has earned the Baskerville family its notorious reputation. Now, on the outskirts of the territory, there is a mountain known as the La Rougette La Noire Mountain. It is filled with monsters, and it is here that the young hounds gather to undergo their evaluation. The instructor of the Baskerville family, Shadow Dog Pavlov van Baskerville, stood before the young masters and explained the rules of the test. They needed to survive for a month in the area and hunt large and strong monsters. He went on to explain that the points for being successful in surviving were 10 points, and if the young masters survived without becoming disabled, it was 30 points. If they failed other young masters and survived, it was 50 points. If they defeated a monster and survived, it was 70 points. And if they fulfilled all the above conditions, they would receive 90 points. Pavlov also told the young masters that if they stole the badge that was given to them from someone else, additional points would be given. However, if they died, they would receive 0 points. He emphasized that there were no 100 points and reminded them of Sir Hugo's lesson that a swordsman dies the moment they become arrogant. The instructor also cautioned against leaving the designated area, as La Rougette La Noire Mountain was a restricted area with many undiscovered things. He recommended that the young masters move within the given space where the monsters had already been subjugated. He informed them that during the exam, shadow dogs would be hiding and grading them. As the young masters waited for the start of the practical exam, some of them noticed Vikir and began discussing his past feats. Despite their comments, Vikir remained composed and thought about the La Rougette La Noire Mountain, which he had visited before. Meanwhile, the triplets standing near Vikir were visibly nervous, sweating with fear. Shadow Dog Pavlov addressed the young masters, wishing them good luck before the bell rang, signaling the start of the exam. As soon as the bell rang, all the young masters started running towards different parts of the mountain to occupy advantageous areas. One of the young masters had a plan and thought about going to a place he had seen in the last year's exam, hoping to gain an edge. The young master behind him thought he could not survive alone and decided to follow him, with the intention of taking it from him. Meanwhile, the triplets were arguing amongst themselves, each wanting to do things their own way and come out on top. Shadow Dog Pavlov observed as the exam began, knowing that it was important to keep casualties to a minimum. Although killing was not prohibited, it was discouraged, and any contestant who did kill would have points deducted. Pavlov and the other shadow dogs were determined to do their best to prevent any unnecessary deaths. One of the shadow dogs that was assigned to follow Vikir was surprised to see him heading towards a restricted area. He wondered where Vikir was going and if he was the rumored genius who had distinguished himself since childhood. The shadow dog was intrigued and looked forward to seeing the skills Vikir would display. Vikir approached a large tree and wondered if this was the right spot. He thought that the soft ground would be suitable for him to set up camp for a while. Vikir then considered taking a break, which left the shadow dog following him confused. While other participants were busy fighting each other for points or facing monsters, Vikir gathered wood and practiced with a wooden stick. Later on, he slept peacefully under the tree. The shadow dog who had been watching Vikir grew impatient and started to question his actions. He wondered how long it had been since Vikir had taken a break and observed that he spent most of his time digging holes, hunting for food, or collecting equipment. The shadow dog started to doubt the rumors about Vikir's supposed genius, wondering if he was planning on hiding instead of actively participating in the exam. At last, the shadow dog decided to leave and find something interesting elsewhere. As soon as the shadow dog left, Vikir's face lit up with a smile. He was happy that he could finally relax and thought to himself that camping outside reminded him of the old days. Vikir recalled a conversation with his group mate about using cacao beans to make fish smell less fishy. He threw some bloody beans into the fire and remarked that the interfering shadow dog was finally gone and he had finished all his preparations. He wondered if he should start his hunt now. A few days later, Vikir entered the restricted area and recognized it from his scouting days. As he was roaming around, he noticed a burning smell and burnt tree roots. He knew that the habitat of the monster he was looking for was around there. Suddenly, he spotted burning stool and realized that he had found it. There was only one monster around there that produced that kind of dropping, a hellhound. The hellhound stood in front of Vikir with flame erupting from its mouth. The hellhound was a dog from hell that brought horrific disasters to those who encountered it. It had a risk rating of B+ and was 3 meters in size. Its sulfuric flames that came out of its mouth and eyes were extremely gaseous and could trigger sparks. If it bit someone, they could not survive. The living things used as firewood would burn and not go out until they completely disappeared. Vikir knew that he was in trouble when he saw the towering figure of the lookout monster that swallowed the hellfires of the oil world, the hellhound. The beast was known to be one of the most dangerous monsters in the land, and Vikir had barely survived his encounter with one when he was just 18 years old in his past life. Now, as an 8-year-old, Vikir knew that it would be impossible for him to defeat the hellhound alone. But he remembered a way to take on the beast that even a child could manage. As the hellhound lunged towards him, Vikir quickly dodged to the side, remembering the first weakness of hellhounds. They could only move in straight lines. They found it difficult to suddenly change directions. Vikir quickly dropped some water on the ground, and as the hellhound charged towards him, he shouted out the second weakness of lookout monsters. They were unable to cross water. Because of the water Vikir dropped, the hellhound took a longer route to reach Vikir, giving him more time to dodge. Vikir knew that even a shallow depth of water could slow them down significantly, exposing the weakness common to all canine monsters, opening their mouth while running. Vikir found himself in another life-threatening situation as the bloodthirsty hellhound attacked him. But Vikir was prepared, and he threw a bloody bean into the monster's mouth. After landing, the hellhound suddenly started to whimper in pain and become unable to move. Vikir explained that chocolate was poison to canines, and with the bloody bean's power to make 100 liters of chocolate with just one bean, it was obvious what it would do to a canine monster like the hellhound. He drew his sword and aimed for the hellhound's weak spot where the ribs were not present, the kidney. With a swift and decisive strike, Vikir pierced the hellhound's kidney, killing it easily. As he absorbed the energy called XP or karma from the defeated monster, Vikir felt his body getting stronger. He swung his sword and felt it becoming lighter, knowing that he was catching up to where he was before his regression before he even reached the age of 15. Vikir couldn't help but wonder what kind of expression Hugo would make when he brought back a monster with a risk rating of B+ as an 8-year-old child. Vikir stood there, ready to take the head of the hellhound he had just defeated, feeling confident in his abilities. He knew he had already secured first place in the practical test, and was eager to claim his reward, something he never would have dreamed of in his past life. But his moment of triumph was short-lived as a group of hellhounds approached him, likely seeking revenge for their fallen comrade. Vikir remained calm and collected, already knowing the weaknesses of these creatures and how to defeat them. As the hellhounds drew nearer, Vikir took out his sword and prepared to take them on. He had plenty of bloody beans left and was ready to use them to his advantage. With a smirk on his face, he cut the dead hellhound's head and taunted the hellhounds, knowing they were no match for his skills and knowledge. He had already defeated one of their kind and was prepared to take them all down. The hellhound suddenly started whimpering, which immediately caught Vikir's attention. He couldn't believe that the fierce beasts were feeling scared of a mere 8-year-old's bloodthirst. Hellhounds would never submit to their prey even if they were to die, Vikir thought to himself, trying to figure out what could have caused the hellhounds to feel so uneasy. As Vikir turned around, he saw a monstrous creature with 3 heads standing before him. It was a Cerberus, the legendary 3-headed dog from Greek mythology. The creature was massive, measuring at least 7 meters in size, and Vikir knew that a Cerberus had a risk rating of a plus. Vikir was bewildered as to what a Cerberus, which typically inhabited the 7th ridge of the La Rouge et La Noire mountain, was doing here. The Cerberus was known as the ultimate lookout monster, residing in a place where all the dead spirits were headed. Vikir noticed that the Cerberus was bleeding and had multiple arrows stuck in its body. He realized that someone might have been hunting it, and it had come all the way to this place being chased. This was his chance to kill and injure a plus-rank monster, and he decided to attack the Cerberus. Despite the Cerberus being a powerful and dangerous creature, Vikir had been hiding his true abilities as a sword expert and had already reached a high level of expertise. His body had been strengthened by the river Styx, and all the weapons he possessed were working well against the injured Cerberus. With his refined swordsmanship, which he had developed through wars with the demon clans, he successfully landed some hits on the Cerberus. Vikir thought that he could do it, as an injured Cerberus was doable. Vikir's attack on the Cerberus seemed to be working, and he thought he had a chance of defeating the injured plus-rank monster. However, in a moment of carelessness, Vikir let his guard down, allowing the Cerberus to strike back with its claws. The first attack broke Vikir's sword, and the second sent him flying through the air. The force of the Cerberus's attack sent Vikir hurtling towards a tree trunk. With a sickening thud, he smashed into the tree trunk, and blood poured from his mouth. The impact had clearly caused a serious injury, and Vikir lay still, his body broken and unmoving. Vikir's eyes opened slowly and a surge of panic rushed through him as he remembered the direct attack of the Cerberus and felt a sharp pain in his left arm. He wondered if the beast had ripped his arm off in the attack, but when he looked down, he saw that it was still attached to his body, with some injuries. Vikir was relieved that the Cerberus was wounded and had not managed to sever his arm completely. He thought about the river Styx and how its magical properties might have played a role in protecting him from the beast's full force. He felt grateful for its protection but knew he couldn't rely on it completely. His relief was short-lived, however, as he quickly realized that the damage was still significant. He knew he wouldn't be able to take another hit from the Cerberus, and so he dodged as the beast attacked him once again. As an experienced hunter, he knew that he had to find the best way out of situations like this. The best possible decision right now was to run, with his tail tucked between his legs. As he ran, Vikir's mind raced with thoughts of survival. He knew that he had to find a way out of this situation, and fast. His eyes darted around, looking for an escape route. That's when he saw it, an iron fence just a few yards away. Vikir's heart leaped with hope. He knew that if he could get past that fence, he would be out of the restricted area and closer to safety. He pushed himself harder, running with all his might. With a burst of adrenaline, Vikir pushed himself through the gate, his heart pounding with relief. He had made it out of the restricted area, but he knew that he was not out of danger yet. He had to reach that place, the safe haven he had prepared for himself before embarking on this dangerous mission. As he ran, he searched for something in the woods nearby, his heart racing with the fear of being caught by the hellhound. Finally, he spotted what he was looking for, a pit he had prepared beforehand. He jumped forward, narrowly avoiding Cerberus's jaws, and the hellhound fell into the pit full of wooden spears. Vikir couldn't help but smile to himself, knowing that he had prepared well for this battle. He had smeared the wooden spears with the bloody bean essence that acted as poison for the cannid monsters. Cerberus growled and foam started oozing from its mouth, but Vikir remained focused and prepared for the next phase of the battle. He knew that Cerberus was a high-ranking demon and that this fight would be one of the toughest of his life. Vikir prepared a wooden spear and he threw it at Cerberus, hitting the hellhound's side. But the Cerberus was still alive and walking towards him, ready to attack. Vikir counted the hellhound's steps as it approached him, one by one. As soon as Cerberus took the 7th step, it stopped abruptly, falling to the ground right in front of Vikir. Vikir let out a sigh of relief, realizing that the rumors were true. The wooden spear he had just thrown was not like the others. It was a spear laced with the venomous fang of the deadly bloody mamba snake that prevented its victim from walking more than 7 steps once they were bitten. Vikir had hidden it away when he was younger, knowing that it could come in handy one day. The energy emanating from Cerberus' body entered Vikir as he stood over the 3 lifeless heads of the beast. He marveled at the power he now possessed, but his mind quickly turned to the concern of how he was going to transport the massive body back. He knew that the cause of the Cerberus's death would be obvious to anyone who saw it, and he began to consider who might be his witness. Perhaps the guardian knight who had seen him carving the wooden spears could be of help. But then, Vikir's thoughts turned to something else entirely. The Cerberus was a gatekeeper, which meant that it was guarding something. A dungeon, most likely, that could be nearby. Vikir's heart quickened at the thought of the treasure that might be hidden within. He knew that dungeons were often the lairs of powerful monsters. Vikir was determined to explore the dungeon, but before going there he took a handful of Cerberus feces and applied it to his body. Vikir knew that by doing this, he could avoid any small monsters that might be lurking in his path. Vikir's keen senses were on full display as he tracked the steps of the Cerberus through the forest. He noted the dried soil, the rotten leaves, and the moist roots, following the trail with a single-minded focus. As he backtracked the path, his eyes widened in recognition. This was the dungeon that the Cerberus had been guarding, and Vikir realized that he had been here before. He knew that this dungeon would be discovered in another 10 years, but he was certain that it would be completely empty by then. Right now, however, he could feel the mana beneath the rotten surface. Vikir cautiously approached the dungeon. He looked around, but he didn't see any light, and he realized that the dungeon must be deeper than he initially thought. But Vikir was undaunted. His crimson eyes glowed with excitement as he stepped inside the dungeon. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of treasures were waiting for him inside. As Vikir made his way through the dark dungeon, he saw ruby minerals that were scattered throughout the area. He was certain that these veins must be connected to the nearby Red All Mountain. Suddenly, he saw a glimmer of light shining from within the dungeon, and he couldn't help but wonder if it was the entrance he had been searching for. Eager to explore further, he quickened his pace and soon found himself standing in a brightly lit room. As his eyes adjusted to the light, he was struck by the sight of a massive ruby placed on a pillar in the center of the room. He couldn't help but marvel at the beauty of the gem, and he realized that it must be infused with mana to produce such a bright glow. However, his moment of awe was interrupted when he spotted a nearby skeleton lying on the ground. As he approached, he noticed signs of violence, including deep stab wounds and dried brown bloodstains. He realized that someone had been here before him, and it had been quite some time since their untimely demise. Curious, Vikir picked up a letter that was lying next to the skeletal remains. The writer of letter began by introducing himself as Cain and explaining that he didn't want to dirty the pure white paper with his name. As Vikir read on, he realized that the handwriting was that of a Baskerville, and he wondered if the writer was a member of that Baskerville family. The letter went on to describe how Cain and his brother Abel had stumbled upon the legendary stone chamber that had been talked about within the family for generations. The two brothers had managed to navigate countless trials and kill many monsters in their quest to reach the chamber. However, the final assignment they found within had tied them there for 3 long years. Vikir couldn't believe the sacrifice they made for the treasure within the dungeon. He wondered what kind of treasure could possibly be worth such a sacrifice. His attention was drawn back to the present as he gazed upon the magnificent ruby at the center of the chamber, realizing that it must be the key to unlocking the final assignment of the dungeon. Vikir read the puzzle on the monument out loud. When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. He couldn't make sense of it, but he remembered reading in the letter that Cain and Abel had also struggled with it. According to the letter, the two brothers had contemplated over the ominous text for a long time before coming to a conclusion. Cain had written that he and Abel were twins who were separated at birth. In order to obtain the treasure of the dungeon, they needed to become one again. That meant only one of them could leave with the treasure. Cain had ended up killing his own brother in a fierce battle, but despite that, there was no change. They had definitely gone from 2 to 1, but Cain couldn't take the treasure. After moments of regret, Cain had decided to leave the place and warn others not to come. He had written in the letter that there was nothing to obtain from this devil's den that only serves to taunt humans. Vikir read the letter carefully as Cain recounted their journey to the dungeon. They had faced countless challenges to get there, but now they were left with nothing. Vikir couldn't help but think about the assignment he had been given, and the fact that it was the same as Cain and Abel's despite the fact that he didn't have a twin. He knew that Cain and Abel had misinterpreted the text, but what did it mean? When entering, it's 1, but once inside, it's 2. When leaving, it's 1. The words echoed in his mind as he tried to decipher their meaning. Vikir refused to give up. He knew that there was no dungeon that could not be beaten, and he was determined to solve this puzzle. Vikir examined the skeleton carefully and suddenly had a realization. He thought about Cain and Abel's failure and understood that their downfall was their fixed mindset, as two individuals. As he walked towards the ruby in the middle of the room, he analyzed the dark passageway leading to a bright stone chamber and realized that the answer to the dungeon was in the riddle. I am one when entering through the dark passageway, but as soon as the ruby's light casts a shadow on me, I become 2. And when darkness re-enters, is when the stone chamber's final stage will open. As he broke the ruby, Vikir revealed that the answer was shadow. As Vikir broke the ruby, a sudden flash of light illuminated the room, revealing the treasure that had been hidden in the dungeon. Vikir's eyes widened in amazement as he realized what lay before him was the cause of the two brothers' deaths. Standing in front of him was a sword that emitted an evil aura, placed upon a stone. Vikir was shocked at the sight of the sword and wondered if it was the relic of the devil's den. As he examined the sword, his eyes fell upon the text inscribed on the stone beneath it. It stated that only those with Baskerville's blood would be able to take Beelzebub. He was surprised and shocked to learn that the sword Beelzebub originated from this very place. At the mention of sword Beelzebub, his mind raced with memories of a childhood long gone. He recalled a picture book he had seen as a child, which depicted the gluttonous fly Beelzebub, an unprecedented great monster that had invaded the continent in old legends. He remembered that Beelzebub was part of the devil's holy constellation, also known as the Seven Calamities, and that the heads of the 7 families had stepped up to stop them. Vikir recalled that the first Baskerville patriarch had fought Beelzebub, and the remnants of its power had been stored in the lands of Baskerville. The demonic energy of Beelzebub was said to have lured monsters, and although the legend was dismissed by most as a mere myth, Vikir knew that it was true. The sword in front of him was proof of that. Vikir also recalled that the blade in front of him had been taken by the demon clans, resulting in countless deaths among humans on the battlefield. As Vikir tried to pull the sword out, he declared that it would never fall into the demon clan's hands again because it was his now. Suddenly, he felt an energy entering his hand and he exclaimed in surprise. He held the hilt firmly in his hand, and suddenly, the sword disappeared from sight. A moment later, it reappeared, fully fused with Vikir's hand. As Vikir extended his hand, the sword Beelzebub emerged from it, emitting a faint aura. Vikir gazed at the blade with wonder, knowing it was made from the corpse of a devil's holy constellation. He felt lucky to have received such a powerful weapon. With a grin on his face, Vikir wondered how much stronger he would become in this life with Beelzebub at his side, and the anticipation filled him with excitement. After exploring the dungeon and realizing that there was nothing else for him to obtain, Vikir made the decision to head back. However, as he was leaving, he suddenly felt something strange happening to his body. He fell on his knees, feeling dizzy and hungry. As Vikir looked down at his hand, he heard Beelzebub's voice echoing, and Vikir realized that it was not he who was hungry, but the sword itself. As Vikir walked out of the dungeon, he clutched his stomach with a painful expression. The hunger that had gripped Beelzebub had taken a toll on him, and he wondered if his sense of smell had been heightened as a result. Suddenly, Beelzebub began to pull Vikir towards a certain direction, tugging at his hand as if urging him to follow. Vikir ran in the direction that the sword was leading him, curious about what he would find. As he reached the location, he saw that it was the corpse of the hellhound that he had killed earlier. Vikir was surprised to see that Beelzebub was drawn to the corpse, and he extended the sword towards it. Vikir watched as Beelzebub absorbed the blood of the hellhound, feeling his own hunger subside as the sword's voracious appetite was sated. He couldn't help but wonder if Beelzebub's hunger had caused the trees and soil in the nearby mountain to dry up. As he looked down at Beelzebub, Vikir felt a sense of responsibility towards the sword and thought to himself, feeling a sense of frustration at Beelzebub's unpredictable nature. Beelzebub finished its meal, making a satisfied sound. Vikir watched as the sword's hunger was finally sated, and he took the opportunity to study its abilities. He looked at the slots on the sword and saw that Beelzebub's inherent ability was called Glutton of Flies. Vikir knew that this power allowed the sword to absorb the skills of its opponents, making it a formidable weapon in battle. However, the absorption amount was nearly infinite, which meant that countless people had lost their abilities and become obsolete after facing Beelzebub. Vikir was aware of the hazardous nature of this power, and he knew that he could only steal up to 3 abilities for the sword. As he examined the first slot on Beelzebub, Vikir saw that it was now equipped with the Hemorrhage Hellhound skill, which was rated B+. This skill allowed the sword to constantly pump out the blood of its opponent, even through the smallest of wounds. Vikir suddenly got an idea and went to the dead Cerberus's body, with Beelzebub starting its work. However, Vikir tried to stop it, saying that it couldn't devour all of it, as he wouldn't be able to explain it during the autopsy if it was too damaged. Vikir lightly tapped Beelzebub on his hand and said, "Enough." Beelzebub cried out in pain like a little child. Afterward, Beelzebub now had all 3 slots full: Burn Injury Cerberus A+ rank, Hemorrhage Hellhound B+ rank, and High Speed Regeneration Norvegicus Sewer Rat F rank. Vikir was surprised to see the High Speed Regeneration ability, and noticed a dead rat under the Cerberus. He realized that Beelzebub had consumed the sewer rat that was crushed underneath the Cerberus. Vikir thought it was a great achievement to have acquired the burn injury skill from the Cerberus, as thermalgia is one of the worst pains a human could experience. It would be much worse than the Hellhound's hemorrhage. Now that they were done preparing the monster to submit for the practical exam, Vikir suggested waiting there until it was over.